Let me tell you a story that most galactic diplomats would rather forget, the kind of tale that makes interstellar relations look like a kindergarten playground fight, except with way more advanced weaponry and significantly less emotional maturity. My name is Jack Riker, Chief Diplomatic Liaison for Earth's Interstellar Relations Department. That's a fancy title that essentially means I'm the person who gets paid to talk highly advanced, often temperamental alien species back from the brink of total interstellar war. Think of me as a cosmic therapist, except my patients are entire civilizations with enough firepower to turn planets into cosmic dust. The year was 2247, and humanity had been part of the broader galactic community for just under 4 decades. We weren't the new kids on the block anymore, but we weren't exactly seasoned veterans either. We were more like that slightly unpredictable teenager at the intergalactic family reunion, capable, somewhat sophisticated, but still prone to making spectacularly poor decisions that would make everyone else either laugh or reach for their weapons. Our primary antagonists in this delicate dance of diplomatic tension were the Krel'nax Confederacy. Imagine a species that combined the diplomatic subtlety of a rhinoceros with the communication skills of a passive-aggressive computer network. They were silicon-based lifeforms that looked like what would happen if you gave a chrome-plated praying mantis advanced quantum computing capabilities and a really bad attitude. Ambassador Vornak, their lead diplomatic representative, was a prime example of Krel'nax diplomacy. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting of the United Galactic Council chambers. Each of his 4 arms could independently process complex mathematical equations while simultaneously preparing to engage in verbal combat. His primary communication appendage, a series of interconnected crystalline structures that vibrated to produce sound, had a tone that could make solid titanium feel uncomfortable. Humanity continues to demonstrate a level of systemic inefficiency that borders on deliberate molecular chaos, Vornak had stated during our last meeting, his translators rendering his complex linguistic patterns into something approximating English. I'd smiled, not the kind of smile that suggested agreement, but the precise diplomatic smile that said, "I hear you, and I'm choosing to interpret this as a compliment. We prefer to think of it as adaptive complexity," I'd responded, leaning back in my chair with a casual confidence that I knew drove the Krel'nax absolutely crazy. A nuanced approach to problem solving that your linear computational models might find challenging to comprehend. The points of contention between our species were numerous and spectacularly Byzantine. There was the ongoing dispute about resource allocation in the Orion-Cygnus trade corridor, a stretch of space that contained approximately 14 mineral-rich star systems and enough political complexity to make Earth's most convoluted international treaties look like children's playground rules. Then there was the territorial dispute around the Nexus 9 cluster, a region of space that was 87.3% uninhabitable rock, 12.5% radiation-soaked gas giants, and 0.2% pure, unadulterated diplomatic headache. Neither humans nor Krel'nax particularly wanted the systems, but both were absolutely committed to preventing the other from claiming them. But my personal favorite point of historical tension, an incident during the Third Diplomatic Summit that the Krel'nax interpreted as an act of profound cultural aggression. Apparently, my predecessor had extended a hand in what humans would consider a standard greeting. To the Krel'nax, this was equivalent to a declaration of molecular war, a challenge to their entire species' genetic lineage, and an insult to their ancestral computational matrices. The resulting diplomatic fallout had taken 3 years, 17 subcommittee meetings, and enough bureaucratic paperwork to construct a small moon to resolve. Our relationship was complicated. We weren't actively at war, but we weren't exactly friends. We were more like 2 neighbors who maintained an elaborate system of passive-aggressive fence measuring and strategic lawn maintenance, except our lawns were entire star systems, and our fence measuring involved quantum-enabled weapon systems. Little did we know that everything was about to change, and it would all start with something no galactic species could have predicted: human children in unexpected danger. Because if there's one universal constant in the cosmos, it's this: mess with someone's kids, and you'll discover just how quickly former enemies can become the most terrifyingly united force in the universe. And trust me, what was coming would redefine the very concept of interstellar cooperation. The call came in at 0300 hours Galactic Standard Time. Not the kind of call you want to receive when you're nursing a synthetic scotch and trying to forget the day's diplomatic gymnastics. Commander Elena Rodriguez, from the Interstellar Colonization and Exploration Division (ICE), was on the line, and her normally composed demeanor was shredded into something raw and desperate. The background noise told a story before her words could: alarms blaring, emergency communication channels crackling, the distant sound of what seemed like controlled panic. "Jack, we have a situation," she said, her voice tight and clipped. The Horizon 7 research colony, it's not a standard emergency. Horizon 7 wasn't just another human outpost, it was a cutting-edge xenobiological research station located in the disputed Nexus 9 cluster, the same region that had been the centerpiece of our ongoing territorial dispute with the Krel'nax. The colony housed approximately 250 permanent residents, including 78 children, whose parents were part of the most advanced xenobiological research team in human space. The colony was unique. Established 5 years ago as a joint research initiative, it sat directly on the contested border between human and Krel'nax claimed territories. Its primary mission was to study the unique quantum-reactive microorganisms that seemed to defy every known biological classification in the galaxy. What kind of situation? I asked, already knowing this wasn't going to be a simple communication glitch or minor environmental incident. Elena's next words made the synthetic scotch in my hand feel suddenly irrelevant. We've detected an unknown quantum energy signature approaching the colony. It's not matching any known technological or biological pattern in our databases, and it's moving with purpose. Purpose. In the vocabulary of interstellar exploration, that word carried weight. It suggested intelligence, intention, and potentially, threat. The quantum energy signature was unlike anything our sensors had ever recorded. It moved like a living cloud, quantum-entangled particles shifting and reforming in patterns that defied traditional physics. Our best computational models, which could typically predict stellar movements millions of years in advance, were completely baffled. What we knew was minimal but terrifying. The energy signature was rapidly approaching the Horizon 7 colony, demonstrating what appeared to be deliberate navigation, emitting radiation levels that would be fatal to most known biological lifeforms, capable of quantum state manipulation, that suggested either incredibly advanced technology or a form of intelligence beyond our current comprehension. How long until it reaches the colony? I asked, already knowing the answer would require immediate action. 12 hours, maybe less, Elena responded. And Jack, the children's quantum biorhythms are changing. Our medical team can't explain it, but something is happening to them. The implications were staggering. Whatever this quantum phenomenon was, it was specifically interacting with the children of the Horizon 7 colony, not the adults, not the infrastructure, just the children. I opened a secure quantum communication channel to the Krel'nax diplomatic headquarters. If there was ever a moment that required setting aside our differences, this was it. Ambassador Vornak's crystalline communication matrix flickered into existence, his angular form looking even more imposing in the low-resolution quantum transmission. "Riker," he said, his translator rendering his complex linguistic clicks into something approximating human speech. "This communication is unexpected. We have a situation," I said, cutting directly to the point. "Horizon 7 colony, unknown quantum phenomenon. Children involved." For a moment, even the hyper-rational Krel'nax seemed to pause. Children were sacred across most sentient species. Regardless of technological or biological differences, the protection of young life was a universal constant. "Provide detailed transmission parameters," Vornak responded, his communication appendages already processing the initial data streams. And just like that, the most unlikely collaboration in galactic history began. Humans and Krel'nax, longtime diplomatic rivals, were about to join forces to understand a threat that could fundamentally change our understanding of quantum physics, biological interaction, and the very nature of intelligent life. 12 hours. One colony. 78 children. An unknown quantum phenomenon that was coming. The clock was ticking. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in interspecies cooperation that would have been hilarious if the stakes weren't so monumentally high. Our quantum analysis team, led by Dr. Marcus Holloway, a man who could make advanced theoretical physics sound like a stand-up comedy routine, began collating data from every conceivable sensor array we could point at the approaching phenomenon. The Krel'nax contributed their own sensor networks, which were so technologically advanced they made our most cutting-edge equipment look like children's toy microscopes. "It's like watching two rival chefs forced to cook in the same kitchen," I muttered to Elena Rodriguez, who was coordinating our emergency response teams. "Except the kitchen is the size of a star system, and the recipe is save 78 children from a quantum something or other that defies all known laws of physics." The quantum phenomenon was behaving in ways that made quantum mechanics look like a predictable children's bedtime story. It would momentarily stabilize into what our sensors read as a coherent structure, then immediately fragment into what Dr. Holloway described as quantum foam that's had way too much caffeine. Ambassador Vornak's communication matrix was a constant presence, his crystalline structures vibrating with a frequency that suggested something remarkably close to what humans might call anxiety, if anxiety could be expressed through complex mathematical algorithms. The quantum entanglement pattern suggests deliberate molecular restructuring. Krel'nax translator rendered his complex communication, but the intentionality, it's unlike any computational model in our databases. The Horizon 7 colony's internal systems were reporting increasingly bizarre readings from the children. Their quantum biorhythms were changing in perfect synchronization with the approaching phenomenon, not as a response, but almost as if they were communicating. Dr. Elena Suzuki, the colony's lead xenobiological researcher, sent a transmission that made everyone pause. "The children are not afraid," she reported, her voice a mixture of scientific curiosity and maternal concern. "They're excited. Their neurological patterns suggest they're experiencing something we can't comprehend. It's like they're having a conversation we're not equipped to understand." The 78 children, ranging from ages 3 to 14, were displaying remarkable physiological changes. Their neural networks were demonstrating quantum coherence levels that should have been impossible for biological entities. Standard medical scans showed their cellular structures were subtly shifting, adapting to something we couldn't yet identify. The Krel'nax research team, led by a quantum physicist named Zornak, who looked like what would happen if you gave a sentient crystal an advanced degree in theoretical physics, began cross-referencing our data with their own extensive archives. "Correlation does not imply causation," Zornak's translator announced, "but the statistical improbability of these simultaneous quantum shifts suggests a level of intentionality that challenges our existing computational models." Translation: something seriously weird was happening, and neither humans nor Krel'nax had a clue what it was. Our initial defensive preparations were a study in controlled panic. Military vessels from both human and Krel'nax fleets began converging on the Horizon 7 colony. These were ships that mere weeks ago would have been more likely to engage in a show of aggressive posturing than actual cooperation. Now, they were forming a protective quantum-shielded perimeter around the colony, their weapon systems primed not for attack, but for potential defense against an unknown threat. The quantum phenomenon was now close enough that we could begin to discern some of its more intricate characteristics. It moved like a living cloud, quantum-entangled particles shifting and reforming in patterns that suggested not just intelligence, but a form of communication so advanced it made our most sophisticated translation matrices look like kindergarten finger paintings. 10 hours until projected contact, Elena announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were facing. Projected contact, in this case, meant something far more complex than a simple collision or interaction. Whatever was coming was preparing to do more than just arrive. It was preparing to communicate, and the only beings it seemed interested in communicating with were the children of Horizon 7. The clock was ticking, the quantum cloud was approaching, and humanity's most unprecedented first contact scenario was about to begin, whether we were ready or not. The final 8 hours before contact were a symphony of controlled chaos that would have made any previous definition of international, or in this case interstellar cooperation, look like amateur hour. Our quantum tracking systems were going absolutely haywire. The approaching phenomenon wasn't just moving, it was adapting, changing, responding to something that our most advanced computational models couldn't even begin to quantify. Dr. Marcus Holloway had taken to pacing the research deck, his typically sardonic humor replaced by a look of pure scientific excitement mixed with something that bordered on existential terror. "It's like watching a living algorithm," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, "but an algorithm that's writing its own rules as it goes along." The children of Horizon 7 were the real mystery. Each of them was experiencing a quantum transformation that defied every known principle of biology, physics, and basic scientific understanding. Take Arya Chen, a 12-year-old who had been studying advanced xenobiology with her parents. Her neural patterns were now showing levels of quantum coherence that would make Nobel Prize-winning physicists weep. Elena Suzuki had set up a dedicated monitoring station, her hands moving with a precision that suggested years of training were the only thing keeping her from completely losing her mind. "Their quantum signatures are synchronizing," she reported, her voice a mixture of scientific detachment and maternal concern. "Not just with each other, with the approaching phenomenon." Ambassador Zornak and his Krel'nax research team were running parallel analyses. Their crystalline communication matrices were vibrating at frequencies that suggested something remarkably close to what humans might call excitement, if excitement could be expressed through complex mathematical algorithms and quantum probability calculations. "The children are not being threatened," Zornak, the lead Krel'nax quantum physicist, announced. "They are being prepared." Prepared for what, exactly, was the million-credit question. The military vessels surrounding the Horizon 7 colony represented the most unprecedented show of cooperative force in galactic history. Human and Krel'nax ships, Vessels that would have been locked in potential combat just days ago now formed a protective quantum-shielded perimeter that was continuously adjusting its configuration based on real-time data from the approaching phenomenon. Commander Rodriguez was coordinating multiple levels of response simultaneously: military preparedness, scientific observation, potential evacuation protocols. Emergency quantum dampening field generators were being positioned around the colony's critical infrastructure. 5 hours to projected contact, the ship's AI announced, its voice a calm counterpoint to the electric tension filling every communications channel. The quantum phenomenon was now close enough that we could see its true nature. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even truly a thing in the traditional sense. It was more like a living computational matrix, quantum entangled particles dancing in patterns that suggested not just intelligence, but a form of communication so advanced it made our most sophisticated translation matrices look like Stone Age communication tools. And at the center of its interaction, the 78 children of Horizon 7. Arya Chen stood at the observation deck of the colony's primary research facility, her eyes reflecting something beyond standard human perception. Around her, the other children were similarly positioned, not in fear but in a state of what could only be described as anticipation. "They're not scared," Dr. Suzuki whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're waiting for what, no one could say." The quantum phenomenon was now close enough that its leading edge began to interact with the colony's outer quantum shield. But instead of the expected destructive interference, something else was happening. The shield wasn't just holding. It was changing, adapting, communicating. "This is beyond first contact," Dr. Holloway muttered. "This is something else entirely." The clock continued to count down. 8 hours became 7. 7 became 6. The children remained perfectly still, their quantum signatures dancing in a pattern that suggested a conversation happening at a level of complexity we were only beginning to comprehend. Something was coming, and it was coming for the children. But was it a threat, or something else entirely? The moment of contact was nothing like anyone had predicted. Not the military strategists, not the quantum physicists, not even the most imaginative science fiction writers in human history. At precisely 0400 hours Galactic Standard Time, the quantum phenomenon reached the Horizon 7 colony's outer quantum shield. What happened next would be debated by scientific communities across multiple species for generations to come. The shield didn't just hold, it didn't just adapt, it transformed. Arya Chen stood at the center of everything, her 12-year-old frame seemingly the focal point of a quantum event that was rewriting the fundamental understanding of communication, intelligence, and existence itself. Around her, the other 77 children moved in a synchronization that suggested something far beyond simple human coordination. "It's a translation matrix," Dr. Marcus Holloway said, his voice a mixture of scientific awe and complete bewilderment. "But not like anything we've ever conceived. They're not just communicating, they're negotiating." Commander Elena Rodriguez was monitoring multiple quantum communication channels simultaneously. Human networks, Krel'nax computational matrices, emergency response frequencies. Each channel was lighting up with data that made absolutely no sense, and yet, somehow, perfect sense. Ambassador Vornak's crystalline communication structure was vibrating at frequencies that suggested something remarkably close to what humans might call shock. If shock could be expressed through complex mathematical algorithms and quantum probability calculations, the children are acting as quantum translators, Zornak, the lead Krel'nax quantum physicist, announced. His communication matrix was processing information at rates that would have melted standard computer systems. They are not just receiving, they are interpreting, negotiating. The quantum phenomenon wasn't an attack, it wasn't an invasion. It was a first contact scenario so advanced, so completely beyond our current understanding, that it made every previous interstellar communication look like two cavemen trying to communicate through interpretive dance. Arya Chen's neural patterns were now showing quantum coherence levels that would have been considered impossible just hours earlier. Her brain was functioning as a living quantum computer, processing and translating information at speeds that defied every known principle of biological computation. The other children were similar. Some were mathematically analyzing the quantum patterns, others were somehow linguistically interpreting them. A few seemed to be emotionally responding to something that existed beyond our current perception of communication. "They're negotiating something," Dr. Elena Suzuki muttered, her hands flying across quantum analysis systems. But negotiating what? The answer came in waves of quantum information that our systems could barely comprehend. The phenomenon was a messenger, but not from another civilization, not from another species. It was a communication matrix from something far more fundamental, something that existed at the quantum level of universal interaction. It was talking about balance, about potential, about possibility, and it had chosen human children as its translators. The Krel'nax vessels and human military ships maintained their protective formation, watching in collective stunned silence as something unprecedented unfolded. Military commanders who would have been preparing for potential combat just hours earlier were now united in a shared sense of witnessing something beyond conflict. The quantum signatures are stabilizing, Zornak announced. But not collapsing, they're establishing. Establishing what, exactly, was the question that hung in the air like a tangible presence. Arya Chen turned, her eyes reflecting quantum patterns that seemed to dance with an intelligence far beyond her 12 years. Around her, the other children were similarly transformed, not physically, but in a way that suggested they had been fundamentally altered at a level of existence we were only beginning to comprehend. "We are being invited," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate across quantum frequencies. Invited where? By whom? To do what? The quantum phenomenon began to stabilize. The children remained at its center. Human and Krel'nax observers watched in collective, breathless anticipation. Something was about to happen, and nothing would ever be the same again. 48 hours after the quantum event, the United Galactic Council convened an emergency session that would redefine every understanding of interstellar communication, biological potential, and the nature of intelligence itself. The conference chamber was a masterpiece of diplomatic engineering. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the circular room, their translation matrices humming with a collective energy of anticipation and confusion. At the center of it all sat the 78 children of Horizon 7, looking both entirely normal and completely extraordinary. Arya Chen, now something more than just a 12-year-old human girl, sat between Ambassador Vornak and Dr. Elena Suzuki. Her eyes held a depth that suggested she had seen, and understood, things that would take decades, perhaps centuries, to fully comprehend. The quantum matrix was a probe, she explained, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate across multiple communication spectrums. Not from another civilization, not from another species, but from the fundamental quantum infrastructure of the universe itself. Dr. Marcus Holloway, who had spent the last 48 hours running every conceivable analysis, looked like a man who had simultaneously won the scientific lottery and lost his mind. It was a test, he muttered, more to himself than to the assembled representatives. A test of potential, of adaptability. The quantum phenomenon had been a sophisticated exploration mechanism, not an invasion, not a threat, but a complex assessment of evolutionary potential across different species and planetary systems. And humanity's children had passed with what could only be described as flying colors. The changes in the children were subtle yet profound. Their neural networks now operated at quantum coherence levels that made our most advanced artificial intelligence look like pocket calculators. They could process information, communicate, and perceive reality in ways that defied previous scientific understanding. But they were still children, still human. We were chosen because of our capacity for adaptation, Arya continued, her explanation flowing like a scientific dissertation, mixed with childhood wonder. Not just technological, emotional, social, the ability to cooperate, to understand, to transform. Ambassador Vornak's crystalline communication matrix vibrated with what could only be described as a quantum equivalent of respect. The Krel'nax, a species known for their rigid computational approach to existence, had been fundamentally transformed by witnessing this event. The diplomatic implications were staggering. Humans and Krel'nax, species that had been on the brink of potential conflict, were now united by a shared experience that transcended traditional understanding of communication and cooperation. Dr. Elena Suzuki, tears in her eyes, understood the deeper implications. They didn't just communicate, she said softly, they showed us what we could become. The children of Horizon 7 were not weapons, they were not a threat, they were ambassadors of a potential that humanity had only dreamed about. Quantum-enhanced, emotionally intelligent, capable of understanding communication at a level that made our previous attempts look like cave paintings. What happens now? Commander Rodriguez asked, her voice carrying the weight of multiple potential futures. Arya Chen smiled, a smile that held the wisdom of quantum universes and the innocence of childhood. We learn, she said simply. The United Galactic Council fell silent. Hundreds of species, representing thousands of planetary systems, recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Not a moment of conflict, not a moment of invasion, a moment of pure, unadulterated potential. In the years that followed, the Horizon 7 event would be studied, debated, and eventually celebrated. The day when human children showed the universe what true communication could look like, when former enemies became allies, when potential was recognized as the most powerful force in existence. And it all started with 78 children who were willing to listen. Really truly listen.